All right. I think we're on now. How are you, Nate?
Wonderful. I'm doing well. We've got a nice gray day in Denver. It's kind of nice to have these kind of murky days because our
Yeah.
we have 300 days of sunlight here. It's really bright.
Oh, really?
So these are kind of like a nice, similar to your May haze in Southern
Mm.
California.
But you guys get snow.
We get snow starting like late October, early November.
Oh, so lucky.
And then it's like in and out until around January. And then February to April, it's really intense. We'll have like a couple of really big snowstorms.
Wow. Colorado is one of my favorite places. I've never visited, but I always thought for like raising a family where I like don't want to do it in LA. I always thought like Colorado would be like one of my favorite places, but I would be so far from my family.
Yeah. Did you grow up in California?
San Jose. Well,
Okay.
originally I'm from Iran. I was born and raised in Iran.
Wow.
Yeah, moved to San Jose when I was 18 and I was there for quite a while before I moved to LA.
Wow.
Yeah. How about you? Born and raised in Denver?
No, I grew up in the deep South,
Right.
Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. And then the first time I visited here was 2001. And
Hmm.
just something opened inside of me
Yeah.
that said, like, this just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so I finally moved here in 2012
Hmm.
after working and doing a consulting gig in San Diego for a couple of years. And then I lived here for 6 years, went and traveled for a while, and then just couldn't get back here quick enough. I really, really love
Missed
Denver.
it.
It's just
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I can't wait to visit sometime soon. Or Breckenridge. I always wanted to go there for like snowboarding and like those places are so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, they're great.
So for people who are not familiar with Nate and your story and what you do, I would like to give a brief introduction, and then we can just like go more into what you do and how you help people. So Nate is a certified wellness coach and a writer as well, and he's someone who helps other people with their trauma and with acceptance of their life experiences. I think it's really cool and beautiful because like I feel like most people who have gone through similar things as you, it's kind of like people are very ashamed of it and people hide it and they don't like to talk about it, they don't like to think about it, let alone be so public about it and bring it up. But there's so much power in someone like you who not only like acknowledges it and sees what's wrong, but then is like, okay, understands that I am in this position to step forward and help all the other people who don't have anyone to help them. So it's like you didn't just like hide it and run away from it. It became like your power to help other people. And I think that's so cool and so beautiful.
Thank you. You mentioned shame. I
Yeah.
think that's the root of what all of us have
Yeah.
in thinking that the traumatic experiences we encountered are our fault.
Yeah.
We somehow created it. There's something about us that made this person hurt us this way, or this wouldn't hurt someone else the way that it's hurting me. It's this internal flame of trauma that
Right.
says somehow I should continue to punish myself for what was done. And I don't think that we realize the role that shame is playing, where we recognize I'm so far detached from this part of myself. And it's not that part of myself that I need to be detached from. It's the story that they carry that I've needed space
Right.
from. And that's
Right.
fair. That's fair. But yeah, I think shame is just, I don't think we realize the way that shame shows up in our lives.
Yeah, I think like it's what you're pointing is like don't identify with your story. That's just something that happened to you. It was something wrong that happened to you. It was never supposed to happen to you, but don't identify with it, right? It was a life experience like any other. It
Yeah.
sucked that it happened, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's okay to hate what happened, but not hate the part of us that's carrying that pain.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
where we get confused. And we're often taught that if we're not showing up in life a certain way with a certain language and behavior that really presents perfection or whatever blends into our social structure, our
Right.
community, then we tend to look inward and say, there's really something wrong with me that I can't show up the way that I would like. And it's my
Yeah.
fault.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, I can only imagine what it's like, but I would imagine when something so terrible happens, you look somewhere to blame someone, right? Because like this balance of your mind just got screwed with so heavily. So now, especially if you're a child, it makes it that much more worse. So now you're just like looking to see who to blame, right? And
Yeah.
it's like if it's the adults who did something like that to a child, then you're like, well, maybe there's a part of you as a child who thinks, well, they're an adult. How could they be wrong? Maybe it's me like who did something wrong. So like you carry that shame for such a long time. And I mean, I don't even know how you like grow apart and away. Well, maybe not away. Maybe you like you've shown it in your story that you accepted more than like grow away from it. So I kind of wanted to like touch on that a little. Well, probably more than a little. Like how do you acknowledge that, and what are some like methods that have helped you in your life to, you know, grow from your trauma?
That's such a great question. And I love the way that you lead into it. I want to be really clear that for so long I didn't. Like most
Yeah.
survivors, I went into survival mode and I built a life that made sense and kept the things that I carried internally at bay, where I didn't have to feel the impacts of this chaos and this turmoil and these kind of life altering experiences that really affected my nervous system and the way that I viewed the world and myself. So I think for so many of us, we have that breaking moment. For me, that was about 12 years ago, where I had a bona fide nervous breakdown, where I say this often in interviews. It was this experience where my mind went one way and my body went the other. And they both
Mm.
said, I'm not willing to work together anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It was the scariest experience I've ever known. I think that that's when I relate to people what anxiety means to me. When I start to feel extreme stress, um, that is what I'm always afraid is going to happen again, because I lost a year of my life during that period of not knowing what is this that's going on inside of me. And finally, after almost a year, I checked into an outpatient center that had really specific trauma informed therapy that helped me begin addressing years of sexual and physical and emotional abuse as a child, and things that I knew that happened, but I didn't know how to speak about them.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's really interesting. I hear a lot of people talk about their childhood and they are very clear that they knew what happened to them was not supposed to happen. I
Yeah.
have never had one shred of that awareness. I
Mm.
believe that because I was just really tenderhearted and an empath, there wasn't enough security in myself or around me to ever say, as horrible as that felt, that was not supposed to happen. It was more like, as horrible as that felt, this is a representation of who I am. So I
Wow.
spent most of my life feeling like a human trash can while presenting to the world a lot of success, buying my first business at 20. My work became the thing that was my shield that demanded that people see some value in me somehow. It felt like that was all that I had. So that's really where I invested heavily. And then 13 years into adulthood, there was just so much trauma and so much bad therapy that I'd had those first 13
Mm.
years that, as trauma normally does, it manifests in a way where I physically could not move on. And it was just incredibly scary. So I want to clarify that, because I think that that's most of our stories, where I love seeing the younger generation, people in their 20s, in trauma informed therapy and be able to name things. That's
Wow.
just not something that we really did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
There was so little conversation around trauma. Um, so I would say shortly after that, and after that outpatient program, I started EMDR therapy, and that was a lifesaver for me. I went 8 to 10 hours a day, and I would go to 2 to 3 days at a time, because I wanted to get as much relief as I could. And then that led to understanding more about internal family systems, IFS therapy, and then just kind of this whole genre of what it means to be trauma informed. I'm kind of odd in that I don't ever get tired of talking about trauma. I don't feel um, exhausted from coaching. I love being in that space. It's really weird. I think that part of that comes from having so much silence in
Yeah.
a part of my life where I presented to the world look at me, this is who I really, really am. I promise I'm worthy. And then inside was just so much pain, so much confusion, so much loneliness, so much disconnect. And
Yeah.
so once you find that voice and you find that freedom and these things that offer you relief, and you recognize that other people are still hurting the way that you did, you can't not speak up and hope that they gravitate towards another survivor's voice and say, I
Yeah.
believe, if there's anybody I'm going to believe, it's another survivor.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a good era right now because like these things are so much more talked about. Like before, nobody really ever talked about them. And like I I remember an era where like I remember like even in college when I was like there was a time where like like a bunch of us were like sitting down, like all my teammates and all my like friends and students and like classmates, and like I don't know if we were drinking or what was happening, but everybody started talking about their trauma. And it turned out that like 90% of the people in that room had something like that was not supposed to happen to them when they were a kid. Both girls and boys. Boys a little less than girls, but like almost all of the girls had like some story to tell. And I was like, wow, this definitely needs to be talked about more. And like everybody just kind of like pushes it in the dark corner and like doesn't even get it fixed. And
I
that's
agree.
something that you did so beautifully, you like owned it almost. I mean, not
Thank you.
almost, 100%.
Thank you. I think that when I think about the kid, this little like sensitive, empathic boy who was the youngest of 7 kids,
Oh wow.
growing up in this diehard religious environment with
Mm,
no access to the world outside of that small town with 5,000 people, just no awareness. We didn't watch TV. Um, so I didn't have language that said something about me is different, and I don't know what it was, but I interpreted what I heard at church and what I heard other adults speak about when they spoke about the term gay. And somehow I knew that that did contribute to my identity, but I didn't fully
mm,
understand it as a kid. You mix all of the sexual abuse in there, and it was really just the toxic message as I became an adult was we have to fix this sexuality piece, and it's because you were abused. And so I entered adulthood just not knowing what roadmap there was to find any sense of myself, and I fully
yeah.
committed to what they taught me I was responsible to fix, which was this thing that was apparently broken, my sexuality.
Hmm.
And that in itself I think is changing so much, where conversion therapy is now banned. I was in conversion therapy for years. That's banned in most states. I know that a lot of
It's not all
religious,
states yet.
no, it's not
Are you
all
kidding
states.
me?
Yeah, and people don't realize it was an underground movement for many of us. I mean, we went to conferences. It was psychological torture. You and I had the
I
discussion about
bet.
the Myers-Briggs. I mean,
Yeah.
to enter the conversion therapy camp, they would use a Myers-Briggs assessment and then just write these really nasty profile reviews and tell you things like, you're so dysfunctional that the test can't detect this. And they do everything to like really break you down to nothing. So I was 21, 22, trying to enter this camp because I just did not know how to get rid of this thing that lived inside of me. And yeah, it's really bizarre that people don't realize there were 700,000 of us that went through
Damn.
those camps and went through those organizations that are still trying to recover
Yeah.
from so much of it. And it's just all of it is so cult-like and damaging. And
100%. 100%.
luckily it's being uprooted and exposed and
Yeah.
made illegal. But yeah, it was really something.
So they were trying to like, so let's say you guys came out and you were like, I'm gay. And they were trying to, with these conversion therapy sessions, they were trying to convince you guys that I'm assuming based on like religious facts and stories and such, that, hey, no, you're wrong. And I'm assuming they were using Myers-Briggs, which has nothing to do with that. But I mean, like anything you want to take and use it to manipulate people and
Right.
use it in a negative, evil way. I mean, like you could use anything. You could take something that's positive and use it to do something negative with it in the world.
Right.
So it's like how those people used it. And I mean, I hate that you feel that way towards the Myers-Briggs, because I mean, that's something that helped me so much in my life,
Sure. Sure.
because like there are so many things that I couldn't understand about myself and the people around me. And that was something that kind of like pinpointed like, oh, you're this way because this is how your brain functionality works, you know? Obviously you can like break out of those patterns if you really want to, but this is how your patterns tend to
Right.
show in your life. And you know, that really helped me understand myself and the people around me. Like there were so many people that I wouldn't be able to be friends with if I didn't know how their brain works, you know? But again, you can take that and you can tell people, oh, like you're this way because of this. Like look, it's even saying like, you know, you can use it in a malicious way, and it seems like that's how they used it.
Yeah, I mean that's how they used everything. It was in our one-on-one classes, we would have these really, it was supposedly therapy, and it was just so sick, the things that they would teach us. But we had to do practices like we had to wear rubber bands on our wrist and pop the rubber band anytime we thought a
Uh-huh.
lustful thought about the same
Yeah,
sex.
they
We
do that
had
with
to,
like AA meetings and stuff like that, so that's like a, yeah,
yeah, um, which isn't helpful at all. It's so
yeah,
shame-based. It's just
yeah,
reinforcing like you're bad, you're wrong. But the roots of it is really kind of this idea that if you're male, any type of same-sex attraction, which is what they called it at the time, is a root from not having a healthy relationship with your same-sex parent, which is just so dumb. I mean, I kept revisiting my relationship with my dad for years, hoping that somehow he would all of a sudden have an interest in my life. He never had an interest in my life. He was, a key abuser of mine since I was a young child. And so
right.
these ideas about healing sexuality or homosexuality are just so demented, because they're literally saying to someone who's very vulnerable, go back to your abuser
Yeah,
and work really hard and reconnect with them and convince them to love you. And then your desire for the same sex will go away. Um,
yeah,
it's hard not to be angry when you think about it now, because I was so young and impressionable and vulnerable, and I believed all of it. I
yeah,
think if there's one thing I could tell other people is trust your instinct above therapist, trust your instinct anytime that reaction goes off in your gut and it says, this person is saying the words that I want to hear, but I don't like the way that I feel in their presence. Trust that.
yeah,
I wish I had someone telling me that.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, these people are so sure in like what they're saying, which is like, why are you so sure? Why are you so sure? I mean, like, you obviously don't have enough evidence. You obviously don't understand biology. You don't understand that, like, a lot of like your sexual orientation is, a lot of it has to do with biology. A lot of it has to do with your brain. So it's like you're just like relating all of it to religion,
Yeah.
and that's like not enough. That's not enough evidence.
And martyred faith. I mean, it's like, how brave to remain celibate and
Yeah.
never touch another soul and remain committed to this God, and then you'll get your treasure in
And
your
then and then
afterlife.
and then you start doing all this other crazy stuff you're not supposed to do. You
Yep.
start hurting all these other people that had nothing to do with what you chose to do for the rest of your life. You bring all
Yep.
this like other people into it. It's just like so unnatural. Like I mean, I think there are a lot of good parts of religion, right? I think there is a sense of community in it. I think there's a sense of goodness in it, right? Just like striving to be a better person. But I think that's where we should have like kind of like left it instead of just like letting it control like all these like little personal things that has nothing to do with religion, right? Like you're
Yeah.
like who you find attractive.
I agree. I think that religion, especially the traditions, or anything that's ceremonial, is really beautiful. A lot of those traditions, but I think when it starts to bleed into you having to conform your nervous system, your brain, your body, your
Right.
sexuality, your longing, your hunger to the prior written agenda of that religion, it becomes really dangerous.
Right. I agree. And so one of your main tactics that you're very well known for, and you speak a lot about it, is the work of the inner child work.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little about that? Like, how does it work? How did you do it?
Yeah. I did not do it well. I didn't understand it. It did not resonate at all when my therapist would explain it to me. And he tried to help me understand that there was this subconscious being that we needed to address that had all this pain. And I understood that part. But the very first session that we had, when he said, are you ready for me to bring him in there? I was like, yeah, bring that little fucker in here. And he was like, wait, what? and he was like, we have to be really, really caring to this part. And I was like, oh, I thought we were trying to get rid of him. Like, I thought we were like
Oh,
making him go away. Like that was the whole thing.
ah,
And I think I look back, that was such a natural response
yeah,
to in your head think, if this happened at 5, this happened at 6, this happened at 7, 8, 9, 10, and I look at these pictures of myself as a kid and I can see those stories and I
mm,
can see that in his face. Obviously, in my mind, if I can just make that go
go
away,
away, yeah,
well, that's not how that works.
yeah,
Those the impact is in our brain and body. That's how we navigate the world, is we are responding to things that we experienced at a time when we didn't have the resources to process it in a
mm,
way that offered us relief. The
right,
inner child is this subconscious part of ourselves. Everybody, I think, that talks about inner child work has a different view. There are certain parts that I do not resonate with at all that other people share, but I know that that is 100% accurate for them. For me, it's deeply, deeply personal. My inner
yeah,
child is that subconscious part who has recorded so many memories and so much pain and shows up in my life constantly trying to protect themselves when they feel triggered or impacted by my current day circumstances. So that means if I have a particular friend who has characteristics that are similar to someone who caused me pain 30 years ago, that inner child shows up as
yeah,
anxiety in my world really quickly and really aggressively, because they've recorded that experience in their head under threat. So they're reminding me of that. For me, inner child work, where it really kind of came together for me was 6 years ago. Very, very dark period of my life. It's right before I came out, and then left my life and started this new journey, traveling and writing.
yeah,
But I just had an experience where I had a stack of photos of myself as a child, and I could not look at them. I've posted some of them on social media before, but when you look at these pictures, you look at this kid's face and you're like, I don't know exactly what's going on in his life, but this kid is in so much pain.
yeah,
It's just tragic. You can't deny what this kid's face is saying in these pictures. And so finally, one night I just took all of those pictures and I taped them on the wall in my living room. And I did 3
mm,
rows of photos from age 5 up until about 32 when I had my nervous breakdown. And then I printed off every poem, every quote from a book that I'd ever heard that meant something to me. And I surrounded all of those photos with those quotes. And for about a month, I'd close the curtains, turn off all the lights, and by candlelight, I would stand and put my hand on one of the quotes and say it out loud. And then I would look for the picture that needed to hear that quote. And I would put my hand on that photo and that part of my life and just tell that part of my life over and over and over whatever was on that quote that they needed to hear.
mm,
And it really brought to life the reality. Like, at the time I was probably 37 or 38, and I was looking at these pictures of me in my
yeah,
early 30s when I had that nervous breakdown. And I don't think I had ever looked at those pictures before.
wow,
And I think that, like most of us, if you had asked me what that guy looked like, I would have rolled my eyes and had like this visceral response. But
mm,
then when I looked at the pictures and I would see him smiling, it was so heartbreaking because he was smiling the best way he knew how, and
mm,
his eyes were completely dead. And now, looking at that, I see that as compassion, because inner child work can work with any age. It's not just the child, it's any subconscious prior part of us that had an experience where they feel stuck, where they were overwhelmed, or
yeah,
something really inappropriate happened to them. That process, I did that for about a month. every night opened chambers inside of me that I did not know existed.
Wow.
And just
Yeah.
really learning and paying attention to that point forward, like how things started to happen, and just welcome that voice that used to feel really, really anxious. But now, because I have a relationship with that part of myself, I have validated what they experienced, I understand it, and they know I'm their greatest advocate. Any subconscious part of me who feels threatened by prior experience being triggered by my life
Yeah.
knows I'm their greatest advocate to say, I'm here to protect. I'm here to make sure that this person does not have access to you. Trust that I've got you. I've got you, and I'm going
Yeah.
to keep you safe.
You're providing the dad that you as a kid maybe like didn't have as a role model, and like the protective that you needed as a kid. Now as an adult, you're kind of providing that father that you needed as a kid, and like, you know, that kid is like still somewhere inside of you, like all of us. And it's amazing how much we actually like forget how much help we can provide for ourselves. Like we're always looking so externally for our solutions, for our answers, you know? And it's like, that's great. Like going to a therapist is amazing. Reading books that can help you is amazing. But at the end of the day, all of those things are only tools for you to gather and then sit with yourself, do what you did inside of your own, you know, space, and like figure your own shit out, because nobody can help you like you can.
I cannot agree with that more. And I think the conversations around trauma therapy are really frustrating to me because I feel like so many people in the therapist community that are not fully trauma informed are
Mm-hmm.
creating this thought process that it's so scary to do trauma work. So it makes people feel intimidated and feel like, oh my God, what's the path? Listen, the path is you learning to love yourself.
Yeah.
The path is you feeling safe enough to look back at prior experiences and say, oh my God, I'm glad that's over. Oh, I'm noticing that a part of me still lives in that experience and they don't need to do that. That's not good for them. That's not good for me. Let me learn how to have a relationship with them so they feel free to walk out. I'm not saying trauma therapy is not hard. I just wish that it was not as complicated that people are making it sound, because listen, I have healed in a conversation with a close friend who shared words with me a couple of years ago with a specific experience. The words that she shared did unbelievable healing inside of me. That was not a trauma modality. She is not a therapist. She's 10 years younger than I am. So I think that you're absolutely right in that we most of us know what happened to us and we're talking to someone about it, but there's all of these really complicated ideas. It's just like, well, you have to have, it's got to be this modality and you've got to do it this many times a week and you've got to have at least this many sessions. Bullshit. Listen, the key to healing trauma is feeling safe,
Yeah.
finding the resources that make you feel safe and help you
Yeah.
look back and rescue the part of yourself that was hurting.
Yeah. I agree. 100%. And I mean, like, I'm in no position to say this because I've never been traumatized like that to understand the depth of it. But if I may, and I could completely be wrong, but this is just like the way I am. Like, I've had like shitty things happen in life, just like anybody else, maybe not to that magnitude. But I feel like something that I see in people around me that hurts them more than anything else is a victim mentality. And I see that in people. I see that in a lot of my friends. And I can see how they could develop that. But by far, when I see people who just, for some reason, figured out that growing a thicker skin can help you move on. If you have that victim mentality, I understand that what happened to you was 100% terrible. But it's like you can either sit here and cry about it for the rest of your life and everybody will understand you. Everybody will understand you. But it's like at some point you have to like get up, grow a little bit of a thicker skin, like look at yourself in the mirror and like just help yourself. Grab the right tools, talk to the right people, read the right books, as we said, and then just start figuring it out. So it's like you say, a lot of people make it so complicated for like a trauma therapy. And I'm like, I see that in a lot of people around me. It seems so complicated for them to heal because they're always stuck in this mentality of like, I'm a victim. I will always be a victim. Terrible things have happened to me. And now I am this person who terrible things have happened to, and I will always be this person. And I'm like, well, when you accept that as an identity, you're not going to move on, no matter how complicated the journey is going to be.
I think a lot of people are missing two elements that have also been misinformed: anger and grief. Both are so powerful and both are so necessary. And I think that that's where a lot of people do feel stuck in the fear of, this is all I've ever known. I don't know how to respond to life differently. And I think the invitation to be angry is so powerful. And
Yeah.
it's funny, I read recently in a book, it was the wording, I'm going to butcher it, but it was really profound. They said, just explain to me what anger is, and every single person gave their definition. And then the instructor said, I just asked for you to give me a definition about anger, and you all gave me a definition around rage. And I
Mm.
was like, yes. And the difference is, anger is a necessary emotion to process pain. Rage is when it encapsulates you and you end up harming someone else.
Oh, wow.
And I
Oh,
thought that was so powerful to understand, because I think that a lot of people, like people who do get stuck, I don't think that a lot of them have had the proper invitation to be validated in what they've experienced. And I think that it really does feel threatening to a lot of people to say, I don't have a clue how to move on. But
yeah.
then even being given the invitation to say, I want to take you down a path where you
Mhm.
have the freedom to express anger and you have the power to grieve, and
Yeah.
watch what that releases inside of your body and your mind and the way that you view the world. Because I do think that that's stored so deeply inside of us, with a
Yeah.
lot of that shame that says you're
Yeah.
not allowed to express anger, or you should be over this by now, or time heals all wounds.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not true. Like,
No.
everybody is different in how they're impacted. But I talk about those two things a lot. I talk about a lot about the cliches that we all hear that just are not appropriate for someone who's experienced trauma. And I think time heals all wounds is one of them.
So I'm wrong in what I'm saying, right?
I would say victim mentality is just so hard to recognize. I believe that the way you experience something and the way I experience something will be
Right.
completely different. EMDR helped me massively. You may go to EMDR and feel triggered. I know people who have gone to do EMDR therapy and were significantly triggered. I believe them. I do not for 1 second believe that they were not triggered by their experience in something that brought me unbelievable relief and healing.
Yeah.
So I just think that I absolutely believe, I'll tell you what I think the bigger problem is just there's not the proper help for the
Yeah.
people that are hurting the most. I think that if anything, over the last few years, we have really magnified the ideas that there are so many people that are hurting that don't have any health, or any access to proper help or care. And over time, that becomes debilitating, because they're carrying all of this stored stuff inside of them without proper support, and also not the proper finances, and also
Yeah.
not the proper health care. Man, the compound of that gets really, really
Right.
intense. Does that make
So
sense?
it does. So it's like, okay, so obviously like therapists are available, like all these, like all this help that you, partook in, and it made you like, the person you are today. So it's like all that help is available. What's keeping someone who knows has these issues to like go and see a therapist aside from the financial reasons? Because yeah, it kind of sucks that like your healthcare doesn't cover. I remember one of our professors was saying that like if you like have a legitimate like mental problem, you get like 10 free sessions of therapy, and then they're like, well, wish you the best. And it's
Yeah.
like, obviously that's not enough. So aside from the financial reasons, when you say like the right help is not available, what is that exactly?
Well, let me address the financial piece first. I had no idea that therapy was a luxury item
Yeah.
until I started sharing my story publicly. And that is something that's really hit me hard. That's why I price all of my courses the way that I do, where they're around the third of the price of other people's courses, with the
Yeah.
intent that I'm asking someone who can afford to pay to sponsor someone else. And that includes all the people who cannot afford. It's just beautiful to watch these
Yeah.
stories get exchanged. And they're emailed one another's information that says this is the story of the person that you sponsored, and all of that's beautiful. So beyond that, I think the main thing is being in an environment or a social structure where the validation of your experience is not available. Why would you be vulnerable and get healthy
Mm,
if your mother, your father, your siblings, your
yeah.
aunts, your uncles, and all your closest friends do not validate the reality of what you're carrying on the inside? So if you were the one in your family who was struggling horribly with depression and your siblings and parents weren't, and you know things that happened to you as a kid, if you say those things out loud, it outs someone else in the family. It puts a reflection on the parents. It changes the paradigm for everyone. So one person is carrying a lot of those secrets. This is not uncommon, by the way. I would
Yeah.
say that this is most people's experience.
100%. Yeah.
That person raising their hand and saying, I need therapy, is frightening, because it's opening this paradigm, this new conversation of what
Why?
all are we going to be talking about here,
Um,
and what does that mean about everybody else's reality. That's why I talk about breaking the cycle so often in my work, because it's so powerful to see someone who does raise their hand and say, if my family cannot get on board with this, I either suffer in my role there or I find a new role.
no.
But how hard is that? I mean, think about a 21-year-old who is coming to terms with things that happened to them 15 years ago and
Yeah.
doesn't quite know, I don't know how I'm going to navigate this, but I know my parents do not want to hear about this. And I know that if I say this out loud, so much of my security shifts. That's really scary for people.
Yeah. How many people, I mean, like, I'm sure like we don't have exact statistics, but like from people that you encounter, like do people usually like come out and say like, mom, like dad did this to me, or like uncle did this to me? Because I feel like there's so much like just awkwardness and shame and embarrassment around that like people just fucking like they don't say anything.
Yeah, I would say that the people who don't say anything is the much larger norm,
Yeah.
because especially if it happens in childhood. I mean, what kid has the ability? And here's the harm: when kids do often speak up, again, it's an innocent kid saying, here's what happened, I don't like the way that felt, and then the other parent saying, in order for me to address this, I have to address some things about myself. So what am I going to do? I'm going to brush this under the rug, just like my parents did when they hurt me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So that's the power of that one person being able to say, no, I'm not going to be secretive about this. And it sucks that I don't have the support that I need around me, but I'm going to get the help that I need in order to feel pleasure about who I am as a human.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, how do you go back to loving those people who did those things to you? Is that even possible? Is like the only way to like go about this to hate those people who did the terrible things to you?
I think that the way that survivors are typically set up is to be taught they are then responsible to forgive or release or still love, wish well, all of that stuff. Pani, I don't know that any of that really needs to be a part of a survivor's conversation. I think that that is putting more work on the shoulders of the survivor. What if instead of me hearing, but they're your parents, I heard, I cannot imagine how painful that the people that were supposed to keep you safe
Yeah.
and teach you about intimacy and love and connection did the things that they did. How can I support you? It doesn't, and then at that point, like where I land on whether or not I forgive or still love or don't love, it's not even part of the equation. It's really, how do we become so aware that we are going to gather around another survivor to offer them healing and hope in the safest possible way without them feeling more obligation back to their abuser? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But think about how often we're told, like, the key is forgiveness. The key is releasing them or letting go or establishing a better connection, that does so much damage. That can do so much damage. I hope that every survivor is able to release, but like I don't think about the people who did all the harm to me. I think about the young boy who experienced the harm. That's where my healing is.
Yeah, you're like, to hell with those people.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't really think about like one of the men who was I was 12 and he was 40. Um, I can't imagine, you know, what his life is like, but if I'm going to think about, like, when we get off this conversation, I'm going to go do breath work. I do this after every interview to breathe life into that younger part of me that says, hey, I know I talked about your story today. I know that makes you rise up and really feel the heat of what you experienced, but I hope you felt respected in that. And I'm just breathing life into you to make sure that you know I was in charge. I didn't do
I love
anything that I
that.
wanted to do, but I really honored that. There's no place in that relationship for who abused him. There's just no
Yeah,
place.
I love that. So it's like, even for people who don't want to go public with what happened, not just like public, but like even if you don't want to like bring it to the attention of like your close ones and your relatives, you can still do the same exact work. You don't like, you don't necessarily need everyone's support to do the work that you did, right? You don't need anyone. You just need yourself, and as we said, like maybe just a few right tools.
I mean, community is ideal for sure. I think that that's why my work is growing so fast, because I talk about how lonely it is
Yeah.
to do trauma recovery and how much it means to connect with other survivors. But yeah, I think if I could say to anyone who feels, I mean, I think all of us who are in my position feel like there's just not hope, because we're looking at our family members and we're recognizing like the pressure is on me
Yeah.
to speak up. And I know the moment I say this, everything changes for me and them. It's a lot of pressure. If I can say to them, holy shit, life is amazing on the other side, and there are so many other people that speak that language, and finding them
Yeah.
is going to meet a need in you that you did not know you had. It's so powerful
Yeah.
to have that connection and awareness that there's other people that feel that same loneliness.
That's very true. I think, yeah, for sure, finding a community of people who went through the same thing as you is one of the biggest ways that like you get help almost with anything. I mean, like if you look at like the meetings they have for like, you know, alcoholics, or you know, drug abusers, or even people who like lost their children. Like when you find a community of people who understand your pain, and you guys can like talk about your ways, I think, yeah, that's very helpful. But I just mentioned that because there are so many people, specifically when it comes to this one thing, that don't speak of it. You know, more than anything else, I think this is the one thing that people really don't talk about it. You know, so it's like all the power to the ones who like go and talk about it and like find their community and like, you know, get the help they need. But I think still most of the people who had, you know, trauma like that and abuse like that when they were a child, they still don't talk about it. They like run away from it, and like it, you know, I'm sure it like shows up in their adult life here and there, and like, you know, like scares them.
Yeah.
Like how do you fix that when you never actually do the work to fix it?
Well, I think that you start to recognize year after year that trauma does spread. Um, I don't think that I also believe that as we age, we start to have a much more adult thought process about what happened, and we can better navigate the emotional and mental impacts and physical impacts of
Right.
trauma. But I think if we can really pause and say, okay, so I'm 43 today, and if something that happened to me at 5 really gets triggered, and I've never dealt with that 5-year-old before, I have to acknowledge, Nate, there's 38 years of pain there. There's 38 years of survival there. There's 38 years of habit that this part has learned to protect, because they don't really
Yeah.
know any other way to navigate that, you know, that world. So I think being able to take that first step, and I always tell people, I just wish that the goal was to say, I'm going to fall head over heels in love with myself. Like
Yeah.
I wish that was the goal in the beginning, was not, I'm going to heal trauma, not, I'm going to do this modality, not, I'm finally going to have the structure that I want in my life. I wish the goal was, I'm going to care so deeply for the parts of me that I felt hurt and
Yeah.
unlovable.
Yeah. And I love that. That's so powerful. Okay. I have this question. I don't like asking it, but I know a lot of people are thinking of it.
Okay.
So, you know, feel free not to answer it. Do you think that what you went through as a child has anything to do with you being gay?
Zero.
Zero.
Absolutely zero. I think that um, Dr. Caroline Leaf and I talked about that when I did her podcast, and I was so proud that she brought that up, because she's done so much work around neuroplasticity and neurofeedback in the
Mm-hmm.
brain, and
Yeah.
um, I believe that that is a mentality that is rooting from religion, that when someone is abused, that makes them become gay. Um, what about the 80% of gay people who were never sexually abused as a child? Well, I mean,
Right.
it's one of those things too, where the population of queer people has always been right at 10%. It really hasn't gone up or down. It's just always been this beautiful, natural uh, percentage of the population.
Yeah.
Um, I believe that the damage that was done, someone asked me on an interview once, they said something about uh, the person who harmed me when I was 12, the person who abused me, for that went on for 2 years. And they identified him as gay. And I said, let's be clear. What
That's
he
a
did to
pedophile.
me has nothing to do with being gay. He is a pedophile.
Yeah.
Pedophilia has nothing to do with sexuality. Pedophilia has to do with harm and being very sick.
And power and
It
control, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And the
Yeah.
number one demographic for pedophiles are straight white men, as far as how
Yeah.
they identify with, with sexuality. So I'm glad that you asked that question, because I would like to expand that conversation.
Yeah.
I did that. That was the basis of my therapy for 13 years, was you only feel this way because you were abused. Pani, I felt this way when I was 5. I
Right.
felt very, very different as
Right.
a kid, and could not identify, what that was. I absolutely believe that sexual abuse can influence sexual behavior and patterns,
Right.
but
Yeah.
there's just no scientific evidence that would say something happens to your brain where you are no longer this and you now become this because
Right.
of sexual abuse.
And it's especially a stupid question because if anything, don't you think then I would be the opposite of what happened to me? Don't you think if anything, I would not want to be gay?
Absolutely.
Right? It's
Absolutely.
like, why would I want to like recreate anything that was even slightly similar to
Well,
what I identify as like trauma?
well, and to add to that, okay, so the debate has been, yeah, but I know women who were straight and then experienced sexual assault or abuse from their husband, and then they dated women. How beautiful is that? If that's true, and that's, they still found intimacy and love and safety, it's none of your fucking business. If that were true in any way, how would that be a bad thing? if
Right.
if if something happened to me as a kid that was so abusive that it changed my sexuality, and I then found safety with other men, and
Mm,
that was what was intimate and affection, that is beautiful and wonderful.
100%.
How is that bad, and how is it anybody else's business to
Yeah.
look and say, like, well, that's that, that should be changed? I don't believe that that's true.
Yeah.
That's certainly not my experience, but I'm really glad that you asked that question.
Yeah. Maybe it's not so much brought up and asked in a oh it's bad and it should be changed. Maybe it's just like curiosity, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I wonder if this had anything to do with that. And the answer is either like, no, 100% no, because I felt this way from when I was much smaller, or B, even if it had anything to do, it showed up in a positive way in my life. And it's, like it's like filling those voids that I couldn't as a kid. And it's like, okay, then there you go, both of those answers are equally as amazing. Um, okay. So I've been wondering. So actually, I wanted to ask you this also. How do you think, because you've had so much work of like healing your childhood trauma, um, how do you think healing from childhood trauma differs from adulthood trauma?
I think that as kids, there's just a much larger gap between when it happened and when we address it. And kids just don't have near the skills to cope and address it. At the end of the day, trauma is trauma. I believe that there's adult trauma that is far more significant than what happens to someone as a kid and still needs to be addressed and dealt with such delicate hands. But I think that I would say that's the main thing, is just really looking at the vulnerability of a kid to not have a brain that's fully developed for many more years, or even be able to question, was this harmful? I will say though, I still think that there's many aspects of adulthood trauma that resonates the same way with people, that they still think, I think I caused this, am I at fault? And it takes a lot of work to really dissect it and be able to say, no, this was harm done to me and it was not supposed to happen.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I want to go back to that question I asked you, that like whether you can love someone who abused you as a child, and especially as an adult. So do you think, like, as an adult, do you think like it should even be like a conversation as adults with like that person who did that to you? Like, do you think like you should sit down, or not even sit down, just like, let's say you're at a, well, I don't know what the right setting would be for it, but do you think there should be a conversation where you as an adult say like, hey, what you did was really wrong. I've worked on it, and like I'm over it, and I'm still working on being over it every day. But I just want you to know what you did was wrong. Do you think you should have a conversation like that with someone who did that to you?
I think it's going to be based on each individual. I think that there are going to be some cases where the person takes immediate responsibility and says, I'm so sorry. And
Yeah.
is there a way that I can support you? And I think a lot of people are going to be in a position where the person says, I don't think that happened. You're making this up, gaslights them, whatever. I just think it's going to be individual. So I don't know that I would say that I think what's really hard is when it's a family member. That's what's so complicated, because you just don't
Yeah.
know if they're going to deny my experience and deny their involvement in my experience. Then what do I do? How do I navigate that? And that's where there's so much risk. So I would say that it really is going to be an individual basis.
Yeah. And so let's say you don't have that conversation. Do you think you could still find the way in your heart to love that person genuinely as a family member or whoever, a friend, whoever? Or is it just like, no?
Um, Again, I don't think that loving them is the goal. I think the
Yeah.
goal is to heal the trauma with or without them. I think the
Yeah.
goal is to take all of that energy and pressure that says, I have a further responsibility to do something else on behalf of the person that harmed me. No, they are secondary to the relationship that I have to rebuild with myself and
Yeah.
really restore a lot of damage that was done by their actions.
Right, but as a secondary thing, right? Because, like, let's say this person is still in your life, right? I mean, maybe this person, I mean, it could be someone you see every day. It could be someone you see at work. Who knows? It could be someone you see at some family gatherings. Let's say simultaneously you're working on yourself and, healing that trauma, but at the same time, this person is still present in your life. How do you handle them still being present in your life, is really what I'm saying.
Empower the hell out of yourself to establish the boundaries that make you feel safe.
Mm.
And that can mean I'm not going to functions when they're there. That can mean um, I've had the space that I've needed and I feel comfortable in their presence, but it's really validating, looking at that part of you and allowing that part of you to really say, this is my boundary here. This is what makes me feel safe in this space.
Yeah. Yeah. And that all goes back to what we started our episode with, spending enough time with yourself and, figuring those answers out for yourself. Like, how do you really feel about this person? How do you feel about this situation? Do you want to be in their presence? Or is that something that triggers you and brings up like really bad memories that might even like ruin your night or your week? So it's like you kind of have to like, sit down with yourself and like figure out these answers for yourself, right? Well, we talked about faith-based trauma. Um, we talked about how to talk to your inner child. Well, how do you talk to your inner child?
There's many different ways. I do a lot of breath work. I have a playlist that I really love that helps really soothe that part of me. And there's songs on that playlist that I listened to when I was a kid. And it's really fascinating, like how nostalgic I get when I hear it. But for me, a lot of it's breath work. That's a lot of the stuff I'm going to be teaching in the course is like, how do you do these different things that help connect? But there's so many different ways. I do a lot of visual work of when I go places, I invite the part of me that needs to come along with me to be very present. I'll envision it when I'm driving. I'll have my 6-year-old in the front seat, the 13-year-old in the back, and just listening to the stories that are being represented. And it's fascinating when you start doing inner child work, you can really lean into that space and feel the impacts of their clarity. Your subconscious has, I think, just no filter for bullshit. Like they're in survival mode and moving and have recorded all of these memories and just looking to keep things moving. And it's fascinating that there are certain people I'll engage with that part of me and that subconscious part of just like, how do you feel around this person? And it's just like red flag. And I'm like, damn, I'm going to pay attention to that. It's never wrong. It's never wrong.
Your intuition.
Yeah.
Do you have any kids?
No kids. No.
Are you going to?
I don't know. I am pretty tired. I'm a pretty tired 43-year-old. Most of my friends, I have a group of my closest friends are 4 couples that have, between the 4 couples, there's 6 kids and 1 on the way, and they're all newborn to 3 years old. And so I get plenty of time with them, which I absolutely love on a very regular basis. But I don't know, I missed so much of my 20s and 30s because I didn't feel like I was allowed to just have a life. So I travel as much as I can and just try and build my life around the things that I love. So we'll see.
Okay. Are you married?
I'm not married. I hardly ever date. I am very much a loner. I spend a lot of time by myself.
What? You're a good-looking, healed man.
Well, thank you.
Who knows about trauma? How's that possible? No, I was gonna say it's amazing when people like do the work, do the inner work, because you like break that cycle of like just trauma and like all the bad memories and all the effects it has on you, and that like people pass that stuff down to their kids all the time, and it just becomes this generational trauma. And it's like that it takes one person to really stand up and do the inner work, and it's hard work, but it's like once you do that, you break that cycle of just terrible things that you're going to pass down to your kids. That's why I asked, because I was like, well, there are a lot of people that I really wish would not have kids, because they go through a lot of shit, they never fix it, pass it down, but you've done the work. You've done the work. So
we'll see. Who knows? I it's really funny. I had a very public career for 13 years, very successful career in real estate. But I mean, I was working anywhere from 60 to 80 hours a week that whole time. And after I came out, I then turned 40. So I came out at 39, right before I turned 39, and then a year later turned 40. Those 2 mile markers were like, oh shit, I have got to figure out what I value in this life, but this is not it. Like, I don't feel like I'm actually living. And since I've slowed down, my life is so different. I love being alone. It's fascinating because I do not date a lot. I can tell you, like in the last year, I've been on 2 dates, and it's not because it was quarantine. I don't date. I don't meet a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, I certainly hope that that's in my future. I've got It's weird coming out later though. It's really, it's a bizarre experience. It's very strange.
How so?
So many people have a really strong perception of the gay culture, and I just don't have that experience, and it's
Yeah.
overwhelming because I'm pretty settled in my life as it is, with my books and my hikes and going to yoga. And I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. I don't love large groups of people anywhere, and it
Yeah.
feels like that's what I would have to do to just start meeting a ton of people. And I really like my quiet life, so I'm
Yeah, me
just
too.
magically going to have someone appear one day who knocks on the door and says, "It's me."
Hi. Hi, what you've been missing.
Yeah, yeah.
That could very much happen. I mean, that sounds like the beginning of almost like every romantic movie. Like somebody just like falls on your lap.
You know what's funny? I'm sure you have this experience a lot too with your podcast and your content, and then having the space on Instagram. People have a perception of who we are that is
Yeah,
never who we are. It
100%.
is just not who we are. And I think that
A small
that
portion.
is, yeah, it's like, this is a part of my life. But I think that's probably the biggest thing that people find so surprising, because I do all this, the jokes and stuff on the meme weekends on my stories. And I think people have a perception of like,
Like,
he's on the go and he's whatever. My life is so quiet. It's
yeah.
really, really quiet. And I like it that way.
Yeah, well, maybe you'll find a quiet a guy who
Yeah.
also likes, the same lifestyle and likes to hike. And I feel like you would find that person here, like in the second day, if you ever came here. I live in this apartment complex in West Hollywood that's primarily gay guys. So if
Hook
you
a
would like,
brother up.
if you
Like,
if you would like to come hang out,
I might do that. I
yeah,
really,
everybody here.
someone that we've dated twice, and are great friends. I think one of the things that was so refreshing, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but it's like, he has zero interest in social media or any of the platform
Yeah,
stuff. He'll listen to it, but just doesn't really have a perception and whatever. That's really refreshing to me.
that's
I
hot.
Yeah, that's really refreshing, of just like, yeah, and I'm pretty serious with my boundaries on social media as it
Wow.
is, but it's
Good.
this, like, it's overwhelming to have so many people engaged. Like, it can be quite triggering and overwhelming. It's nice that on a deep level, like, even my closest friends, they follow me on social media. They never ask. And it's really quite nice, because that's my
Yeah,
work. Like, that's my job.
yeah. Well, when
So
are you gonna come out this way? Because I know Nicole is here too, and I bet you miss her too.
yeah. I will probably be there. I've got another good friend, Leah, who lives in LA. I've got a bunch of close friends that live in LA, oddly
Yeah.
enough. I go about once a year.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
When's the next time?
Probably, I would say probably in the spring, because I'm going to do quite a bit of hiking in the Pacific Northwest in New England this
Nice,
fall.
nice.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, let's for sure hang out with Nicole when you come.
That'd be amazing.
That would be. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you.
All right, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Oh, why don't you real quick tell people where they can find you? And also, I want to tell people about your course also. I mean, we touched on it a little bit, but just like specifically where they can find it.
Yeah, natewrites.com is my website. If you go there, you'll see the links to my social media. My social media is all Nate_Postlethwait, but my last name is pretty complicated. So natewrites.com is the easiest way. And then there's a tab that says Healing the Younger You that gives you the breakdown of what we're doing. It's kind of a community event where people can go at their own pace, but then log on to do 2 different live Q&As throughout the week to discuss the video and worksheets that come out on Sunday. Or you can be completely anonymous. But again, the way that I set it up, which has been so beautiful to see this behind the scenes, got a lot of people saying, there's no way I can afford this, would love a sponsor. And so priced it at $98. And there's a ton of people that are stepping up and saying, I'm happy to sponsor someone. And when you sponsor someone, if they have chosen to share their story publicly, you get an automated email with their contact information. And all of those people sponsor and sponsee are supporting one another as they navigate the course, which is just really beautiful.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Really out there giving people what they need, Nate. I
I'm
love it.
trying. I'm trying.
Love that. So much power in that. It's awesome. Good for you.
Thank you.
And all right. Well, have a great day. Thank you everyone for listening, and goodbye.